All right, let's get right into it. There's a critical global trend we need to talk about: population collapse.
That's a pretty stark warning, right? It sets the stage for what feels like a massive global issue. But here's the thing. The common explanations we hear all the time, the ones about modern values or economic shifts, well, they just don't fully line up with the actual data.
So what is the true cause? To really find the answer, we have to cut through all the noise. We've got to move past the headlines and dig into the raw data, looking for the signal that's been buried for a long time.
You know the story, right? The established narrative is, well, it's pretty flawed. We've all heard the dominant theories. Post-war prosperity created the baby boom, and now modern values, everything from contraception to careers for women, are supposedly causing this big decline. But when you actually analyze the signal hidden in all that noise, the historical data tells a completely different story. It shows a pattern that flies right in the face of those common assumptions. What's wild is that a very similar population decline actually happened about a century ago, and the circumstances? Totally different.
And that discrepancy? That's where the truth is hiding. It points to a pivotal factor that is almost always overlooked. See, these inconsistencies in the historical record, they're basically a breadcrumb trail leading to a much more powerful and different driver of population change.
Okay, first things first. We have to understand the core metrics here. And believe me, it's not as simple as just counting babies. So the key metric isn't the birth rate itself, but something called the replacement rate. Think of it as the magic number of kids a woman needs to have just to keep the population stable. And what's absolutely critical to get is that this number isn't fixed. It actually changes over time. And this is where it gets really interesting. Back in the 1920s, because infant mortality was so much higher, the replacement rate was over 3 children per woman. Today, it's about 2.1. So what does that mean? It means the population was actually collapsing faster 100 years ago than it is right now. And get this was all before modern birth control or women entering the workforce in large numbers. So let's start deconstructing that conventional wisdom, because this historical data really throws a wrench in the stories we're usually told. Okay, narrative number 1, post-war prosperity sparked the baby boom. But the data? It tells us the exact opposite. The Roaring '20s were a time of incredible prosperity, right? Yet birth rates absolutely plummeted. The idea that a booming economy just automatically equals more kids, it just doesn't hold up. And what about the modern values argument? Well, the data shows the decline in the 1920s happened long before modern contraceptives were a thing or before women joined the workforce en masse. So blaming today's societal shifts kind of misses the point, right? It totally overlooks this critical period where the exact same thing happened without any of those factors. It's clear that some other variable has to be at play here.
Now let's talk about anomalies in the data, because the timeline itself reveals another huge crack in the official story. Turns out, the famous baby boom didn't start when or how most of us think it did.
Just look at the timeline. After World War I in 1918, no baby boom. Then you hit the Roaring '20s and birth rates drop off a cliff. But then, the Great Depression, a time of extreme economic hardship. And what happens? Birth rates actually start to recover. So by the time we get to the end of World War II in 1945, the baby boom isn't some new event. It's just continuing a trend that had already started a decade earlier, in the middle of a depression. How crazy is that?
So if it wasn't prosperity and it wasn't modern values, then what is the pivotal variable? If the usual explanations just fall apart under scrutiny, what is the real economic force driving all of this? The answer isn't about how big the economy is. It's about something else entirely. And that brings us to the core of this whole thing, the inequality variable. This is the hidden correlation, the one factor that tracks with fertility rates with almost unbelievable accuracy. Here it is. The pivotal factor is not prosperity itself, but how that prosperity is distributed. It's not about how much total wealth a society has. It's about who actually has access to it. The real key here isn't GDP numbers. It's about whether people feel like they have a real shot at economic opportunity and social mobility. And that brings us to income inequality. It's a simple concept, really. It just measures the gap between the wealthiest and, well, everyone else. And this is central to everything that follows. Okay, so when you take the data on income inequality, this is from the economist Thomas Piketty, and you map it out, something
absolutely remarkable happens. If you flip the inequality graph upside down, so a high point means low inequality, more economic equality for everyone, it mirrors the fertility rate almost perfectly. For the last 100 years, think about that. When the gap between the rich and poor is narrow, fertility is high. When that gap gets wide, fertility just plummets.
The correlation is it's unmistakable. When people feel like they can actually get ahead, that they have a shot at providing a good life for their family, they have more children. And you can see it in history. Policies like the New Deal and the GI Bill, they massively reduced income inequality. They created a real pathway to the middle class. And guess what? As people felt more secure, more stable, like they had a real chance, the birth rate went right up with it.
So what's the end game here? What does all this historical data actually mean for us, right now? Well, it completely reframes the problem, and it points to a very modern battlefield where the future is literally being decided.
Think about our modern high-cost cities. With housing costs just spiraling out of control, they've basically become population black holes. Yeah, they're engines of economic growth, but for the middle class, they make raising a family almost impossible. They actively push birth rates down, and they have to rely on a constant stream of new people moving in just to keep from shrinking. This is the modern battlefield. The critical factor is remote work. Why? Because it decouples your job from having to live in one of those incredibly expensive urban centers. It's a potential solution, right? It could let families move to more affordable places. But what's the conflict? Massive corporate pressure for everyone to return to the office. They're basically trying to re-anchor people to the very high-cost areas that suppress birth rates. By doing this, businesses are literally risking their own future supply of workers. And that leaves us with one last critical question. Companies obviously need future workers and future customers, but will they actually help foster the economic equality required to create them? The data is pretty clear. For a society to build its next generation, its people need to feel a sense of economic stability and opportunity. And here's the ultimate irony. The very things that corporations are fighting against right now, things like remote work that could lead to broader wealth distribution, well, they might just be the only things that can guarantee their own survival in the long run.